I did a live interview satellite with Brian Gumbel, and I said when they put this innocent man to death, they're going to lose $15 to $20 billion every year they get from the American taxpayers. And Brian Gumbel says, what are you talking about? They only get $3 billion. And I said, Brian, that's only the foreign aid bill. Look at all the other trade compacts, economic assistance, military assistance. I'm saying this to you right now. Israel gets approximately $15 billion a year from the American taxpayers. That $15 billion is $30,000 for every man, woman, and child. And people in my district are losing their pension benefits. So I was targeted big time.
By the Israelis.
And I can't understand this, why no one in Congress is raising their voice. And the reason is very simple. And this may be you don't want to hear, I don't know. And I certainly don't want to hurt you on your show. You have one of the best. You're fair. But I believe that Israel has a powerful stranglehold on the American government. They control both members of the House and the Senate. They have us involved in wars of which we have little or no interest. Our children are coming back in body bags. Our nation is bankrupt over these wars. And if you open your mouth, you get targeted. And if they don't beat you at the poll, they'll put you in prison.
Congressman, you said something in an interview with our own Greta Van Susteren. You and I got into this on my radio show. And I am shocked, frankly disappointed, and these remarks sound like the conspiratorial, anti-Semitic remarks of people that we have heard from over the years. And what you said was, quote, talking about Israel, they're controlling much of our foreign policy, they're influencing much of our domestic policy. What do you mean by that?
I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you the Prime Minister of Israel, His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu.
I want to thank you, Democrats and Republicans, for your common support for Israel, year after year, decade after decade.
Because that sounds to me like a bizarre conspiracy theory. Why would you say something like that when it's just, first of all, patently untrue?
No matter on which side of the aisle you sit, you stand with Israel. This Capitol Dome helped build our Iron Dome.
Number one, I served in Congress for 17 years. I've seen members question bills and votes on how does Israel feel about this. I must have heard that every time there was a significant vote. But Israel, through its lobby, has manifested so much power over the United States Congress that we're embroiled in wars that I don't believe we should be. Our kids are coming back in body bags. And in the long run, this Israeli lobby is going to hurt Israel. So as soon as you mention Israel, someone claims you're an anti-Semite. The truth of the matter is, I'm pro-American, Sean, and I don't know, I don't like, hear me. Hear me.
Listening.
I don't like what's happening in America today.
All right, that's fair.
Our kids are coming back in body bags.
Wait a minute, but you're saying,
we're bankrupt, completely broke. But our policies in the Mideast have been so one-sided and subjective. Without objectivity, we've created so many enemies. The only way they can strike back is we've imported the terrorists from those actions.
Wait a minute.
So if you question it, you're saying you're an anti-Semite.
No, that's not what you did. That's not what you said. You said they're controlling our foreign policy. They're controlling our domestic policy.
Yes, and I believe they are.
Hear me now.
I believe they control the Senate and the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
That's insane.
And they're controlling our foreign policy.
Congressman, that's conspiratorial nutjob stuff.
We love Israel. We will fight for Israel 100%, 1,000%. It will be there forever.
I have said to people when they ask me if this Capitol crumbled to the ground, the one thing that would remain is our commitment to our aid, and I don't even call it aid, our cooperation with Israel. Because that's fundamental to who we, fundamental to...
You know, I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. Were I a Jew, I would be a Zionist. And my father pointed out to me, I did not need to be a Jew to be a Zionist. For I am.
My name is Donald Trump, and I'm a big fan of Israel.
And if I'm fortunate enough to be elected president, the United States will reaffirm we have a strong and enduring national interest in Israel's security.
That our commitment to Israel's security and my commitment to Israel's security is and always will be unshakable.
The American people and the American Congress in both parties support the state of Israel.
America's commitment to Israel is absolutely unshakable. It is unquestionable.
And we must stand with Israel, which is why I support the United States' commitment to provide Israel with $38 billion in military assistance over the next decade. I am fully committing to maintaining Israel's qualitative military edge.
Shalom, Israel Republicans. I'm Governor Mike Pence. It's a great honor for Donald Trump and I to stand together with you tonight in support of Israel. And I'm deeply humbled to be speaking to you at this historic time and with all of you there in that special holy place of Jerusalem, the eternal home of the Jewish people. Over the course of this campaign, many people have asked me why our ticket stands so strongly with Israel. Donald Trump and I stand with Israel because Israel's fight is our fight, because Israel's cause is our cause, and because her fate is our fate. Israel is not just our strongest ally in the region. As I've said for so many years, Israel is our most cherished ally in the world. If the world knows nothing else, the world will know this: America stands with Israel.
There are like 40 nations that are attending the Zionist meeting in Israel tomorrow.
Right.
Matter of fact, Vice President Pence and Nancy Pelosi are there together in Jerusalem.
That tells you a lot what would bring the two parties together, especially at a time when they're supposed to be at each other's throat. There's a Senate trial right now for impeachment. But you're saying that Vice President Pence and Nancy Pelosi have completely thrown away partisanship.
The impeachment, so Nancy Pelosi's not worried about the impeachment. Vice President Pence isn't worried about the impeachment. They're in Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Says a lot, doesn't it?
It tells you who has the power.
And yes, I believe Israel, through their lobby, has manifested total power of the Congress of the United States.
Power.
And my concern is the taxpayers and the citizens of the United States should control their government, not a foreign entity.
Foreign interference in our elections, whatever the Russians may have done, barely counts weighs in the balance as compared with what another state does openly, brazenly, and with enormous support. Israeli intervention in U.S. elections vastly overwhelms anything the Russians may have done. I mean, even to the point where the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, goes directly to Congress without even informing the president and speaks to Congress with overwhelming applause to try to undermine the president's policies. What happened with Obama and Netanyahu in 2015.
You know, it's important to point out here that a lot of times, and we saw this with Russiagate too, you know, they say things are Russia all the time, but a lot of times it's this sort of transnational faction, a lot of it organized crime ties that exist between Russia and Israel that are very considerable, and it doesn't get talked about a lot because you're allowed to criticize Russia all day long, but not Israel. And of course, that's used to great effect by Israel's government and this particular, you know, faction of crime families, because I want people to keep in mind, like Robert Maxwell and a lot of the people I talk about in my Epstein series, it's an organized crime syndicate that got in bed with intelligence from the earliest days of the creating of Israel's intelligence in the late 40s, and which also, you know, dovetailed with the creation of the CIA and all of that stuff, right? So we need to be honest about, you the Russian hacker narrative, they're not willing to even go that far. It's clearly a thing, a boogeyman, a straw man they basically created to blame everything on, but they're not actually trying to investigate the roots of the Russian involvement, or they would, end up realizing the transnational connections here, of which there are a lot. So, this whole thing of we have to blame Russia and we're bringing in CrowdStrike and there's no credible evidence, no technical evidence still released, and we're just taking U.S. intelligence's word for it. They're obviously not going to call out someone tied up with their faction, their, organized criminal power structure, right? So they're just, looking for a way to sort of push it into the same game that the Obama-Biden faction has been playing for a long time, particularly the last 4 years, which is Russiagate all day long. And of course, Russiagate, it ended up becoming, in a lot of cases, Israelgate, even from the Mueller investigation and things like that, involvements of Psy Group and these other Israeli-connected firms that were overtly involved in election meddling.
So none of the collusion narrative has been proven here, except with respect to Israel, a very inconvenient area for Russiagate enthusiasts.
How does Israel play into all of this?
Well, Israel's central in this, and what we're looking at is actually Israelgate. It was Jared Kushner, the presidential son-in-law, whose family, Charles Kushner, and the family foundation run by his father, has extensive ties to Benjamin Netanyahu. In fact, when Jared Kushner was a boy and Netanyahu was in town in New York, he would have to leave his bedroom so Benjamin Netanyahu, then the Israeli opposition leader, could sleep in his bed. His family has made extensive donations to the Israeli settlement enterprise, something Kushner failed to acknowledge, which is part of the reason why he hasn't gotten security clearance. And here's Jared Kushner ordering Michael Flynn, on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu, on behalf of a foreign power, to lobby the Russians to use their veto power on the UN Security Council to stifle a resolution that was going to condemn Israeli settlement activity. So you're looking at actual collusion by the Netanyahu administration through their friend Jared Kushner and Michael Flynn. And that is just completely inconvenient because, as we've seen with Haim Saban, one of the largest donors to Hillary Clinton, actually thanking Jared Kushner for colluding with Israel. This is a bipartisan enterprise. This is how the sausage is made in Washington.
Pretty telling soundbite there, no question about it.
Right. And of course, a lot of the Russiagate figures that were like, oh, look, Trump and Kushner and whoever are tied to this Russian oligarch, those Russian oligarchs almost always have ties to Israel's government.
I was in Moscow on Simchas Torah night. There were 1,000 people there. There were 13 oligarchs in the room. Their net worth was $30-some-odd billion. Now, what shul in America has people worth $30 billion in the shul for dancing? At 3:30, at 4, so we were dancing till 11 o'clock, and then we had a break, and then we had the dancing again. At 3 o'clock in the morning, we went on the street, and at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm walking home with Rabbi Lazar. You'd think he'd be impressed that he had these oligarchs worth $30 billion. He said to me, I had success tonight. I said, what was your success? He says, 3 guys decided to get a bris, and 4 guys decided to put on tefillin. But we're talking here a different kind of world. They house a row of Mercedes in front of the shul, each guy with a driver and bodyguards, and these guys are dancing inside like everybody else. They run the economy of Russia. The difference is we're the Jewish establishment in Russia. There's no Jewish Federation. We are the Jewish Federation. There's no ADL. We are the ADL. There's no AJC. We are the AJC. Judaism in Russia is run 98% by Chabad. It's a different ballgame. And everything in the city is run by Jews. The shopping centers are owned by Jews. Both airlines are owned by a Jew. The banks are owned by Jews. The gas stations are owned by Jews. The whole downtown, everything is owned by these oligarchs. In fact, the governor now, on behalf of Ukraine, is one of these oligarchs. Russia is a different mentality. And this is part of the conflict right now between Russia and the United States. You can't push the Russians have to be dealt with through quiet. A very shrewd observer in Moscow told me, you can't deal with Russia like the United States. Here it's public pressure, it's tumult, it's polls. In Russia, everything is quiet deals. For instance, there's a lot of quiet deals between Russia and Israel that you know nothing about. And the early meetings between Putin and Sharon and Putin and Bibi were orchestrated by Chabad. They were arranged. But a lot of the deals, Russia is a different political mentality. There's a lot of quiet deals between Russia and Israel that you know nothing about. There's a lot of quiet deals between Russia and Israel that you know nothing about.
And that, of course, goes back to how Russia's economy was set up basically following the collapse of the Soviet Union, which involved, one of the main architects of that was Larry Summers, a close Epstein associate, right? Very much part of that organized crime faction, setting up the Russian oligarchy. And of course, they're going to have ties with, other governments that are intimately interwoven into that transnational crime group, right? So, you know, obviously the mainstream media, when they say Russian hackers, are not interested in having an honest discussion about the reality of the situation.
There is news that if there is a serial election meddler in this world, it may be, drum roll please. Thought I was going to say Russia, right? Israel. Israel. This is a story reported by Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper. This story that I'm about to share with you, it'll appear in Haaretz, it'll appear in other publications in Israel. It will not appear on CNN or Fox News or MSNBC. I guarantee you that. But they will do 4,000 stories on Russian meddling. All right, so here it is, as promised. According to Israeli reporters, their country has meddled in elections in Africa, Asia, and Latin America repeatedly and systematically. They were apparently caught red-handed by Facebook, who have now banned the Israeli company that was running the fake news influence campaign. Facebook's head of cybersecurity policy actually is saying that they have purged 65 Israeli accounts, 161 pages, dozens of groups, and 4 Instagram accounts. And they say many were linked to the Archimedes Group. The Archimedes Group. This is a Tel Aviv-based political consulting and lobbying firm that boasts, they say publicly, they boast of their social media skills and their ability to, get this, change reality. Change reality. Here's the RT correspondent Paula Sleer from Tel Aviv with this story.
Well, what we know is that this has been happening for years, where you have fake accounts that are masquerading either as locals or as local news outlets. And they are either providing glowing information or are forming part of a smear campaign regarding candidates who are standing in local elections. And part of the tactic they use is to quote so-called unidentified sources and leaked information. Now, what we're hearing from Facebook is that this has affected countries such as Latin America, numerous countries across Asia and Africa, where essentially the client's wishes have changed the reality on the ground. Facebook saying that this is an extensive Israeli-run political influence campaign. Having said that, though, Facebook has not been that forthcoming, and that is largely, presumably, because the relationship between Facebook and Israel is very close. Facebook in the past has taken down political advertisements that are considered distasteful or inconvenient by the Israeli government. The head of the Facebook cybersecurity policy had this to say.
Today we removed 265 Facebook and Instagram accounts, Facebook pages, groups and events involved in coordinated inauthentic behavior. This activity originated in Israel and focused on Nigeria, Senegal, Togo, Angola, Niger and Tunisia, along with some activity in Latin America and Southeast Asia.
Now, some of the pages boasted as many as 2.8 million followers. There were also a series of events that were advertised online, but it's not clear whether or not those events actually took place. More than $800,000 is estimated to have been spent over the past 7 years on these advertisements aimed at deception. And a lot of it finds its source in an Israeli corporation that's called the Archimedes Group. Now, we have asked the group for comment, but we're still waiting to receive a response from them. At the same time, a lot of the people or the organizations involved have concealed their identities. Now, there was a similar case with another Israeli organization whose motto was to shape reality. Now, it was forced to close its doors after it was implicated in the whole Mueller investigation, and it was criticized and came under fire for possible involvement in the Donald Trump presidential election. So we need to wait and see how this story itself develops.
The Israeli government is involved in numerous internet projects. Director General of Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs, Sima Vaknin-Gil, told a forum of Israeli tech developers to flood the internet with pro-Israel propaganda. When she was Israel's chief censor, she said, "We censor information that is critical to our enemies, who have no capabilities like us, do not have a Jewish brain, and therefore our enemy relies to a large extent on open information." Her ministry has a budget of roughly $70 million to fight what it calls a war on consciousness terrorism. To win it, she said, Israel must use tricks and craftiness. Another Israeli entity that plays a role in covert internet activity is the Israeli military's legendary high-tech spy branch, Unit 8200. This unit is composed of thousands of cyber warriors, primarily 18 to 21 years of age, some even younger. An article in the Jewish press reports that Unit 8200 has developed a great reputation for effectiveness in intelligence gathering, including operating a massive global spy network. Numerous Israeli tech companies, many of them headed by former military intelligence officers, assist in these online spying efforts, sometimes receiving Israeli government funding for digital initiatives aimed at gathering intelligence on activist groups and countering their efforts. To be clear, this is all part of an effort by an occupying government and its military working covertly to achieve censorship of reporting on its atrocities. Major internet companies have reportedly been cooperating with Israel. In 2015, Israel's deputy foreign minister visited Silicon Valley and met with YouTube's CEO and Google's director of public policy. Afterwards, Israeli media reported that it was agreed that the companies would strengthen ties with the foreign ministry and build a regular mechanism of control to prevent the distribution of these incendiary materials on the network. Google is not the only tech company with close ties to Israel. For example, Facebook's head of policy in Israel, Jordana Cutler, had previously been employed for many years by the Israeli government. In 2016, Fortune magazine reported that Facebook, Google, and YouTube are complying with up to 95% of Israeli requests to delete content that the government says incites Palestinian violence. Among other things, Google said it would increase the number of members of its Trusted Flagger program, which enables certain organizations and government agencies to report content. It also said it would increase support for NGOs and organizations working to present a corrective voice. One such trusted flagger is the Anti-Defamation League, commonly known as the ADL, whose mission includes standing up for Israel. The ADL considers criticism of Israel to be anti-Semitism. The ADL has created something it calls the Online Hate Index, aimed at recognizing what it considers hate speech and targeting it for censorship.
By combining artificial intelligence and machine learning with social science, the Online Hate Index will ultimately uncover and identify trends and patterns in hate speech across different platforms.
A leaked secret January 2017 ADL strategy paper detailed how to counter the pro-Palestine movement. Among its many strategies were some focused on the importance of efforts in cyberspace. The paper called for a mix of policy advocacy and industry engagement with corporations such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter in a manner consistent with the ADL Center for Technology and Society and its Anti-Cyber Hate Working Group. The detailed 32-page document reported that in recent years, a massive investment of resources and talent had been directed against the pro-Palestine movement. One of the results, the paper said, was to create a worldwide pro-Israel network. It was this network that the report sought to mobilize. On March 13th, at the 2018 South by Southwest Music Festival, YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki revealed that the company has just hired an additional 10,000 people to help review content flagged for removal. She also talked about a new feature that will soon be added to the platform.
When there are videos that are focused around something that's a conspiracy, and we're using a list of well-known internet conspiracies from Wikipedia, that we will show as a companion unit next to the video information from Wikipedia showing that here is information from Wikipedia about this event.
So YouTube will be sending people to text.
We will be providing a companion union of text.
Moetzet Yesha, in conjunction with My Israel, has arranged an instruction day for wiki editors. The goal of the day is to teach people how to edit in Wikipedia, which is the #1 source of information today in the world. As a way of example, if someone searches the Gaza flotilla, we want to be there. We want to be the guys who influence what is written there, how it's written, and to ensure that it's balanced and Zionist in nature.
To suggest, as you're doing here tonight, that they control our Congress, that, quote, they are influencing and the sole control of influencing of our domestic policy is an absurdity. It sounds like you are a kook.
Sean, I'm not suggesting it. I'm telling it. Yes, I believe they manifest a great power over America. Let me also say, in the last 4 years, there are 2 separate incidents of AIPAC spying on America. We even conducted a search warrant on AIPAC headquarters. Now, I don't like what's going on here.
The Lobby, the 4-part Al Jazeera documentary that was blocked under heavy Israeli pressure shortly before its release, has been leaked online by the Chicago-based website Electronic Intifada, the French website Orient 21, and the Lebanese newspaper Al Akhbar. The series is an inside look over 5 months by an undercover reporter armed with a hidden camera at how the government and intelligence agencies of Israel work with U.S. domestic Jewish groups such as the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC, the Israel Project, and Stand With Us to spy on, smear, and attack critics, especially American university students who support the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS movement. It shows how the Israel lobby uses huge cash donations, often far above the U.S. legal limit, and flies hundreds of members of Congress to Israel for lavish and unpaid vacations at Israeli seaside resorts, bribing the American lawmakers to do Israel's bidding, including providing military aid such as the $38 billion over 10 years that was approved by Congress in 2016.
Now, I'm not an expert on campaign finance and the intricate laws around that, but what the film shows that is really fascinating and disturbing is that there are these networks, off-the-books networks, for raising massive amounts of donation money, of campaign money.
We're talking about hundreds of thousands,
hundreds
up to 200,000.
On one night, 200,000 on one night, and it's all off the books. The events where this is done are not advertised in writing. It's all through informal networks, and what they'll do is people will just put in their credit cards, and then they will be charged to the maximum limit. And these donations will be bundled and directed at whoever the
But there's an instance in the
candidate.
film where one person is giving them 20 credit cards because it's 2,700 is the individual limit, but you've got 20 cards, and you can charge each one $2,700.
Yeah, there's a suggestion that some of this is, if not outright illegal.
Let me also say, in the last 4 years, there are 2 separate incidents of AIPAC spying on America. We even conducted a search warrant on AIPAC headquarters. Now, I don't like what's going on here.
We have an AIPAC espionage scandal that resulted in a bunch of top people leaving AIPAC and creating the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, or WINEP, a spinoff so they would avoid being prosecuted. So that's AIPAC, the Israel lobby organization, right, that we're all supposed to love and we can't criticize. But not only did the AIPAC spy then in the 80s, in 2009 there was the Larry Franklin scandal where Larry Franklin was passing state secrets to AIPAC employees. Of course, that came out and there was an indictment, but no charges really, especially not against the AIPAC people. They got off scot-free.
Something has taken a grip of politics in Washington, D.C. Now, I have come into contact with the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. They are by far the most powerful lobby in Washington, D.C. I've had these run-ins with AIPAC.
First-handedly and also frontally was assaulted by the presence of the pro-Israel lobby to such an extent.
Physically assaulted?
Well, politically assaulted,
okay,
to such an extent that my father had to ask the question publicly, what does Stone Mountain, Georgia have to do with Israel? What I was doing was servicing the needs of my constituents. And I was not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
I know AIPAC very well, but AIPAC didn't really know me. They thought that they could kick me out of Congress one time and I would go and hide under a rock. I decided to run for Congress again and I won. didn't stop doing what I was doing the first time, so they kicked me out of Congress again. And then I got on a boat called Dignity and decided to go to Gaza. And so we're out there in the sea, and all of a sudden, the Israeli warships, there were 3 of them, and they began to follow us. And they trained their spotlights on the boat. And they would come up really close, and then they would fall back. And we'd think, well, we're safe now. And then they'd come up really close again, and then they'd fall back. And then they came up really close, and then all of a sudden, it went pitch dark. We're in international waters, and all of a sudden, we all are flying everywhere. The boat had been rammed 3 times, twice in the front, 1 on the side where I was sitting. There had been no contact at all from the Israeli Navy until after the ramming, and then they called us terrorists and said that we were engaged in subversive activity. We had 3 tons of medical supplies on our boat. They lied and said that our captain was trying to outmaneuver them and crashed into them, and that their warship was damaged by our pleasure boat.
Reports conflict on the direct causes that triggered the incident that Israel says was an accident. Activists on board claimed they were far in international waters when they were attacked.
We were 90 miles from Gaza, more than 53 miles off the coast of Israel. International waters reach right up to 20, some say 12 miles off the coast of Israel. So we were well and truly in international waters when it occurred, and it's been quite difficult for us on board here, but the majority of passengers here are determined, as soon as we reach Lebanon and back to Cyprus, to keep continuing to organise such boats as these to reach the people of Gaza.
This morning about 5 o'clock we was rammed by an Israeli gunboat without any warning, any provocation or anything. There was 2 other gunboats on our port side with searchlights shining at us, distracting us, while the 3rd boat came from ahead and rammed us.
Thank you. And our objective was to deliver these medical supplies, about 3 tons of medical supplies, to the hospitals in Gaza. We were prevented from entering Gaza by Israeli patrol boats.
Asked why they have intercepted the humanitarian boat, the Israeli army said the Al-Karama trip to Gaza was offensive. Its purpose was to provoke Israel and to support Hamas. As the Israeli attack on Gaza continues and hundreds of Palestinians die, preventing a humanitarian supply boat from reaching them may or may not change the reality on the ground that much.
Legal action is being prepared now against Israel for what they did to the Dignity. But let me just really conclude my remarks by saying that the fact that we can have a town hall meeting like this on this subject, in my, 12 years in Congress, and far longer than that in political life, is absolutely unprecedented. We have an opening now to tell the greater American public the truth about the activities of our government, what goes on in our name with our tax dollars, and how we can stop it. And the one thing that I would ask of the Congress and of our president-elect is that we don't need to send not one more dime and not one more bomb to Israel.
What I'm saying to you is this power that's being manifest on our Congress is going to backfire, and it's going to end up in the long run hurting Israel, because the American people are getting about fed up with this government.
One last shot at this. Will you back down from, quote, they are controlling much, meaning the Israelis, they are controlling much of our foreign policy. Will you back off that statement?
No, I don't.
All right, then we disagree. Congressman, thanks for being with us.
Good to be on your show. And if you open your mouth, you get targeted. And if they don't beat you at the poll, they'll put you in prison.
They'll put you in prison.
Trafficking is charged with racketeering and bribery. His crocodile mouth got his hummingbird ass in trouble.
I'm not going to admit the crimes that I did not do, and will do the time, and expect a long time to try and shut me up.
And the congressman pleads not guilty to the federal charges against him by reason of sanity, as he puts it. The 10 charges, including bribery, racketeering, and fraud, could land him more than 60 years behind bars. But even with that risk, he demands he be allowed to defend himself as his supporters pack the courtroom. Courtroom spectators chuckle at the congressman's many curt remarks to the judge, such as when she asks him if he understands the charges against him. His reply, "Your Honor, I understand completely that I'm being screwed here."
That conviction was a kangaroo trial, and there are a lot of marsupials involved.
After spending almost 7 years in 3 different federal prisons, Congressman turned inmate Jim Traficant will likely serve his last 6 months back in his hometown. We've learned he's to be transferred in March from a facility in Minnesota to the Community Corrections Association on Youngstown's south side. Back in 2002, Traficant was convicted on racketeering, bribery, and tax evasion charges in federal court and then expelled from the seat he held in Congress for some 18 years. Once he arrives at CCA, Traficant will have to find himself a new line of work.
If I survived, I'd do what I had to do, but I wasn't going to buckle down. I wasn't going to be intimidated. Stood my ground, did what I had to do. But like I said, I could have had a pardon, but there's no way I was going to make admissions of something that I didn't do. And I want all your listeners to listen to this very carefully. 6-year investigation, $15 million, over 250 agents, and they said they didn't make any tapes on Jim Traficant, didn't bug my telephone. Now a Secret Service agent has come out, retired, Mike Robertson, and made the following statement. He said Traficant was certainly railroaded. He said they had no physical evidence. He said they bugged that guy to death. They had people go to him with body mics. He said anybody in their right mind knows that. He said the reason the government voluntarily made that admission in court is because Traficant could have subpoenaed all of their tapes and said, where's the crime? Now, I want your listeners to remember this. They said they made no tapes, didn't bug my telephone or anything for 6 years now. If you believe that, I got some property down in Florida I think somebody wants to sell you.
And Congressman James Traficant, this is powerful information, but I also want to get into your persecution, why you were persecuted, who was behind it.
If I didn't have this powerful Jewish animus against me, I think I'd be a very rich man for what they did. But I'm still the top target of Israel.
Well, let's expand on this Israel situation. Let's go through from the start. When did you first get on the Israeli lobby's radar? Were there back-channel threats to you in Congress? You know, did they warn you to back off first? What happened?
Well, first of all, right when I was running, they tried to get me $10,000 cash. And I told them, you keep your money and I'll keep my vote. So I think I was targeted before I ever walked down there. Second of all, I tried to cut 4 and 8 every year for everybody. I was asked a couple times to exempt Israel, and I said I wouldn't do that, and I never could pass any cuts. I worked hard to try, and, we have people sleeping on steel grates, and we're sending money overseas. Don't make much sense to me.
I got to be careful. It's like a lot of friends say, they've already destroyed you, they've taken away your name. Be careful you don't get too much in the public eye again, because they'll kill you.
An accident happened last night on the farm he and his family own in Green Township. 27 First News reporter Jerry Ricciuti got a hold of the 911 calls placed minutes after Traficant was hurt.
Authorities first got the call to come out to this farm in Green Township last night just before 8 p.m. We're told a man looking to buy some used farm equipment from the former congressman was the one who called for help.
Tractor rolled over on him.
What happened?
A tractor rolled over on him.
Traficant was apparently trying to drive an old tractor into one of the barns on the property when it hit another piece of equipment and rolled over backwards.
The timing of this news kind of eerie.
So I was targeted big time.
By the Israelis.
You know, I was a #1 target of the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee and the #1 target of the Justice Department since 1983, being the only American to ever defeat him pro se in a RICO trial. And I have big enemies, but I have some grudges, and I want to go at them. I want to go at them big time.
Former Ohio Congressman James Traficant has died. The colorful and controversial Democrat spent nearly 2 decades in Congress. He was expelled after being convicted of taking bribes. Traficant passed away from injuries he received in a tractor accident Tuesday near Youngstown. He was 73 years old.
They'll kill you.
Once you're targeted, and they fired a woman in 1990 or 1991, I don't know if you remember this, Alex, a top-ranking woman in the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, and she gave out their hit list of the politicians that they wanted to get rid of, and Jim Traficant was the #1 target in the world. I had a bullseye put on my back, but quite frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a damn. And here's the bottom line. If you're afraid to speak out about your own country, what has happened to our Constitution and our Bill of Rights? Why is everybody afraid to whisper what's going on? Listen to the strong statement I use on your show, even though it has labeled me and hurt me politically. Israel has a stranglehold in the United States of America. They have us in foreign wars we shouldn't be involved with that have bankrupted us, and they've gone so far as having Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon making a statement on Israeli radio October 3, 2001, the following: "We, the Jewish people, control America, and the Americans know it." And no one read that in a newspaper in this country. No one knows about it. So maybe Jim Traficant is going to be labeled, but I think if we've got a problem, let's straighten our country out. We don't have to hurt Israel. They are a friend. They're a democracy within a cluster of monarchs and dictators, but we don't have to prosecute their expansion plans. We don't have to get involved and be pushed into wars by Israel, manipulated by Israel, and we shouldn't answer to nobody but the American people.
James Traficant paid the price for representing the interests of the American people over the demands of the powers that be. In true Orwellian style, Traficant was convicted of corruption in 2002. Subsequently, he endured 7 years in prison for essentially refusing to bow to the masters of American politics. Indeed, America has been hijacked, and the result is for the servile and corrupt to be rewarded, while those with honor and integrity are ruthlessly targeted. James Traficant was dead before he could see justice for himself, and unsurprisingly, the circumstances of his death are predictably suspicious, undeniably suspicious. Many, including myself, refuse to ignore the significant motivation agents of Israel had in seeing his demise. Regardless of who is responsible for his death, Traficant's uncompromising stance regarding America's subservience to the Jewish state will in the end cement him as one of the great patriots in modern American history, who, like many of the founding fathers of America, warned us of the enemies inside the gate.
I became a top target of the Israeli lobby, and no question, I'm labeled anti-Semite, which I'm really not, but they do control much of our government, our press, Broadway, Hollywood, the money system, and they basically control this country. And you do not want Israel as an enemy, and I became an enemy of Israel. That, I think, was my downfall.
The Israeli leadership wanted nuclear weapons desperately as far back as the 1950s. They viewed this as indispensable to their survival and expansion. And the great global financial powers behind Israel were, of course, quite friendly to this because they're using Israel as I said, their organized crime base. In the 1960s, there was a tremendous battle between President John F. Kennedy and the Israeli government headed by Ben-Gurion over this program. Ben-Gurion was determined to achieve nuclear weapons. Kennedy was equally determined to stop him.
I am absolutely convinced that John F. Kennedy is the last president of the United States to have honor, integrity, and courage. Not only was JFK fighting to halt the Israeli nuclear weapons program, he was insisting that Israel's nuclear power plant be inspected, something that has not been done to this day. He was also demanding that the American Zionist Council, since renamed AIPAC, be registered as a foreign agent. We see today the magnitude of his failure to achieve this goal by virtue of the fact that AIPAC virtually owns America's long since prostituted politicians.
The result was that Kennedy died, and he was replaced by Lyndon Johnson, a Zionist puppet who was completely controlled by the Zionist lobby on all Middle East issues. And Johnson turned around and essentially handed the Israelis their nuclear weapons.
It is hard to overestimate just how profound America changed when the patriot John F. Kennedy was replaced by one of the supreme American traitors in Lyndon Baines Johnson. Not only did Johnson bolster Israel's nuclear weapons program, he did not compel the American Zionist Council to register as a foreign agent. The end result of this is an American political system that is so corrupt that it would make a banana republic blush. As if this isn't bad enough, in June 1967, Johnson covered up the brutal Israeli attack on the USS Liberty, an attack that resulted in the murder of 34 American sailors as well as 171 casualties. While the attack was taking place, Johnson personally recalled air defenses for the Liberty with the following explanation, quote, "We are not going to embarrass an ally," end of quote. The Liberty Incident was a classic false flag to be blamed on Egypt. Israel's intention was to suck American sons and daughters into an extremely dangerous war for Israel, this time against Egypt, a Soviet ally. This false flag nearly resulted in World War III by virtue of the fact that nuclear-armed Phantom jets were launched towards Cairo and were only recalled when it became clear that the Liberty was not going to sink and witnesses would live to tell the tale.
That's what the world really doesn't know today, and I think that's why we were sworn to secrecy, is how close we really came to a potential nuclear holocaust.
You know how much press the nuclear warheads got when they landed in Cuba?
The step toward world thermonuclear war.
Well, this was 1,000 times worse, but nobody knows about it.
The story of the Liberty is not a whodunit, it's a whodunit.
The casualties were high, 34 American dead and 75 wounded. There were arguments later about how the error happened.
The reality of what happened is it was not a mistake, and they wanted to sink us, and what does that mean to this country?
Case closed, mistaken identity. We're very sorry. Is there anything else I can help you with?
Well, there's no question. It was a big cover-up from the top on down.
You just couldn't talk about it. It was such a secret, and with our lives threatened, and who knows if they were monitoring us or doing whatever.
You ever repeat one word about the USS Liberty and who did it to you, I'll guarantee you I'll see you in Leavenworth or worse. You know what worse means?
Then you're told by the President of the United States, Secretary of Defense, to keep your mouth shut, don't say anything, and that's a direct order.
Israel had America by the scruff of the neck. Such was the need to cover up what America had got up to during the Six-Day War.
His girlfriend from the Mossad told him that he could raise all kinds of money to continue the Vietnam War.
The Liberty is a microcosm of this much bigger problem in the Middle East. And Americans need to know what happened. The story has to be told.
Most Americans remember their war dead on Memorial Day, but there's a small group of veterans fighting for special recognition every June 8th. That's the day in 1967 that the USS Liberty was attacked, surprisingly, by the State of Israel during Israel's six-day war with Egypt. 34 crew members died. The survivors say new information coming to light proves it wasn't all a big mistake. June 8th, 1967. The day Israel fired rockets, burning napalm, and torpedoes at an Allied ship, the USS Liberty. It was day 4 of Israel's own six-day war with Egypt.
But officially, America was not involved in the war.
No,
we had not taken sides.
We were in a neutral position, we thought. And it didn't end up being that way, Rick. It was a total surprise of what they did and how they did it, and how relenting they were trying to destroy and murder American citizens on the high seas.
Let's talk about it. What happened?
Well, the jet aircraft suddenly, around 2 o'clock, unmarked jet aircraft, unmarked. We had no idea who was attacking it. We thought it was the Arabs. I mean, our best buddies in the whole world wouldn't do it, the Israelis. We thought it was the Arabs, and we figured, heck, in 15 minutes, 10 minutes, we're going to have help there to take care of us. One interesting.
What was the nature of the attack at that moment?
Well, it was rockets, cannons, machine guns. This is a hole right here.
Israeli jets and motor torpedo boats launch an unprovoked attack on the ship. They drop napalm and strafe its decks with rockets, cannon fire, and armor-piercing rounds before trying to sink it with torpedoes.
I saw the Israeli flag, and I thought, oh, God, thank God, our friends are here to save us. Little did I know they'd come to murder the rest of us and massacre us and destroy us.
Yeah. You had no idea that it was Israel attacking the ship?
None.
So you saw the boats approaching, the Israeli flag is flying, and you're thinking, our allies are coming to save us, but instead they torpedoed the boat.
They torpedoed it, and then they went around our ship and circled it, and shooting with their machine guns, 50 calibers. There's over 5,000 armor-piercing bullets in that ship, 5,000. Now counting the 850 holes just like this. Napalm burning us up. They shoot a torpedo at us, 5 of them, and one of them hits the starboard side.
How many of these were there that you counted?
850 of them. They told us to quit counting at 850.
850 of those were in the ship.
Over 5,000 armor-piercing bullets. Napalm was dropped on our ship.
Napalm?
Napalm. 5 torpedoes were fired at our ship. 5, with out of 3 torpedo boats. 4 of them missed, and 1 hit on the starboard side, just about 2 frames, or 1 frame, from the engine room. If it hits the engine room, we're all gone. Well, we wouldn't be here.
Another victim was the United States naval vessel Liberty. She was mistaken for an Egyptian vessel, and Israeli ships and planes torpedoed and strafed her.
The official story is the incident was a case of mistaken identity, that the Israelis didn't know that it was an American ship.
But it was a mistake. It was a mistake.
You didn't know it was an American ship?
We didn't know it was an American ship. People thought at the beginning that this was an Egyptian ship, an Arab ship.
But Liberty's crew has long maintained Israeli air forces were flying low enough to clearly see the American flag.
Well, I, for one, know that our flag was flying, and I know for a fact they knew who we were.
Throughout the attack, the ship flies the Stars and Stripes, the flag of Israel's closest ally, the United States of America. Its name, the USS Liberty, is freshly painted on its stern, and the bow carries the distinctive numbers of an American naval vessel.
They know exactly who we were. We were identified already. They said that, we got it on tape that they knew we were an American ship.
This audio tape, which has never been broadcast before, was recorded in real time by the Israeli military during the assault. The woman's voice in the background is counting down the seconds. It proves that Israeli commanders knew all along that they were attacking an American ship. For the first time, this and other evidence allows us to reveal the true story of what happened that day and what came after. When a deadly assault by one ally on another was covered up, and an American president was manipulated by the secret agents of a foreign power, events that have shaped U.S.-Israeli relations ever since.
The communications were taken out on almost the first pass. They took out every antenna off that ship. There was a bunch of them. I don't even know how many, but there was a lot of them. They took out we had 4 50 caliber machine guns on that ship, and that was for repel boarders anyway. Like we were in port or somebody tried to board our ship, we'd have that for defense. That's all we had, but they were gone. So how did they know to hit every antenna, every gun tub? They knew everything, and where they got all the information from, God only knows, but they knew everything. They jammed it.
Crew members say Israel even fired at lifeboats after one of its 5 torpedoes had already smashed a 40-foot hole in the ship's side, a section where 25 intercept operators were working and killed.
And they shot up the life rafts that were put into the water, and they shot the ones that were still on board the ship.
Bullet holes, shell holes everywhere, blood. The forecastle, the front part of the ship, was just red with blood.
I can't tell you how severe and how bad it was to witness and to see and to hear and to feel the carnage that these Zionist murders put on America, and our own government covered it up for them.
The U.S. Court of Inquiry reported in just 20 days. It was a rush job, full of spelling mistakes, much key evidence ignored, no Israelis interviewed, and it exonerated them from blame.
I read the Court of Inquiry and realized that my statements had been stricken from the record and never recorded. So I knew then for certain that the cover-up was massive.
The Israelis then rushed out their own report, which concluded that the whole affair was a series of mistakes and that no one was to blame. The only dissenting voice was that of the Israeli ambassador in Washington. He sent a secret telegram back home arguing that Israel was clearly guilty. He cited the audio tape of the attack, the existence of which was known to top Israeli officials, and mentioned the crucial 20-minute gap that followed the Liberty's identification and the launch of the torpedoes against her. He said they should own up to what they had done and put the guilty on trial. His advice was ignored. The focus now was to repair the damage to American-Israeli relations. Since the attack on the Liberty, the USA and Israel have grown ever closer. At the time, George Ball, the U.S. Undersecretary of State, noted that it seemed clear to the Israelis that as American leaders did not have the courage to punish them for the blatant murder of American citizens, they would let them get away with anything.
I love Israel. I love Israel. I've been with Israel so long in terms of I've received some of my greatest honors from Israel.
I would love that. This was a special token of affection given by myself and the First Lady to Prime Minister and the First Lady of Israel, and it's a key. We call it a key to the White House, and it's a key to our country and to our hearts.
Tonight, a foreign government has been caught, apparently red-handed, according to U.S. government, spying on none other than the White House. How did they do it? Well, they used a very sophisticated spying device. It's called a stingray. Have you ever heard of this? That's what it looks like. It's carefully placed near 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue by somebody. And what a stingray does is it kind of fools the cell phone towers into thinking that it's a cell phone tower, right? Fools your phone if you happen to be walking by. So your phone thinks it's connecting to the cell phone tower when it's actually connecting to this stingray, so they can get your information, your identification, and possibly listen to what you're saying. That's how it works. That's the technology, right? It means these stingers could then listen to any and all conversations by anyone at the White House, from the president on down, when they are using a non-secure phone, which, by the way, most people, even the president, have been known to use non-secure phones. Now, here's what's interesting. This story came to light more than 24 hours ago, and I bet most of you have not even heard of it yet, right? And whatever you have heard has been relatively muted. What does that tell you? Somebody tried to spy on the White House, and the story's been somewhat muted. Now, let me put it to you this way. Do you think if the country that placed the spying device on the White House, right, on the President of the United States and his staff, had been, say, China? How about Venezuela? Even Germany or France? Do you think the story would have been ignored by the media? Or do you think they would have made it a big deal? Russia? Forget about it. Rachel Maddow's hair would be on fire right now if you flipped over to her newscast. What a picture. But you see, it's none of those countries. The country that the U.S. government has concluded was spying on the White House is Israel. Therefore, the reaction is mostly crickets. Crickets from President Trump, crickets from Congress. As far as the media goes, well, here's how they've covered it.
We did hear just recently from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, who echoed the comments from his office, calling this entire report a lie. Bill?
Trey Yingst, thanks. Intriguing nonetheless. We'll see what comes of it, if anything.
I have to say, most of the U.S. officials I've spoken with this morning have essentially said, this is awkward, but not altogether surprising, and it's far from a worst-case scenario, which is what they're really preparing for and worried about.
What comes of it, if anything, says one reporter on Fox, on CBS? News reports across the board downplay the spying, characterizing it as no big deal, or everybody does it, as that one CBS reporter actually said in the continuation of her report. Everybody does it. That's what her sources in Congress told her. Is that credible, really? Can we believe a media that reacts, that treats one spying or meddling incident with wall-to-wall coverage for an entire year, while treating this incident like barely worth covering? Isn't that inherently dishonest? And what does it say about them? What does it say about us? And about what else they may be lying to us about?
There are disturbing spying allegations against one of America's closest allies. Israel is denying a Politico report, accusing its government of planting surveillance devices near the White House and other sensitive locations around Washington.
Politico also claims President Trump was aware but took no action to punish the Israeli government. CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis is following the developing story in Washington. All right, Olivia, I am glad you are here. What can you tell us about this report and why Israel, one of our top allies, is appearing to spy on the Trump administration? I mean, if we think about some of the reporting, the president's more than willing to talk to Israeli representatives in the Oval Office about all kinds of stuff.
Right. So what more do they need to hear?
Right.
Yes.
I don't believe that. No, I don't think the Israelis were spying on us. I really would find that hard to believe. My relationship with Israel has been great. You look at Golan Heights, you look at Jerusalem with moving the embassy to Jerusalem, becoming the capital. You look at even the Iran deal, what's happened with Iran. Iran is a much different country right now than it was 2.5 years ago. It's in a much different position. No, I don't believe that. I wouldn't believe that story. Anything's possible, but I don't believe it.
So this Politico report is actually the bookend to what had emerged as something of a mystery last year, which was when these surveillance devices, which are called IMSI catchers or stingrays, were first found near the White House and in other sensitive areas of Washington. But all that the Department of Homeland Security disclosed at that time was that it had found them. It wasn't sure who had put them there. So now, according to this Politico report, there's been this result of a counterintelligence probe launched into the matter by the FBI and others, and it has shown that Israel was behind the placement of these devices. That's based, it sounds like from this report, on an analysis of who was taking data off of them, because not all spy agencies can do this.
Israel's government has been caught numerous times, countless times, manipulating the U.S. government, spying on the U.S. government. We can talk about the Jonathan Pollard one, I think is probably one of the better ones to discuss, or the idea that during Trump's administration, Israel got caught putting, stingray devices on the White House.
Yeah, spying on the White House, but they've done it before. All right. Yeah. So, tell me how many espionage scandals you can think of involving Russia or China that are like public knowledge and you can look up and go read about, right? So from the 1980s alone, with Israel, we have the Promise software scandal. We have Jonathan Pollard.
Jonathan Pollard, a U.S. Navy intelligence analyst, was arrested and charged with spying.
Pollard, a civilian Navy counter-terrorist expert, reportedly passed information to
Pollard had been spying for a year and a half. Enough time, officials say, for Pollard to fill 30 file cabinets.
During an 18-month period, Jonathan Pollard sold thousands of classified secrets to Israel.
His betrayal of the U.S. government is considered by some to be one of the most profound security breaches in American history.
Mr. Pollard? Yes. Mr. Pollard, I believe, will not see the light of day.
Others argued that Pollard was unjustly sentenced, not because he spied, but because he spied for Israel.
Navy intelligence analyst Jonathan Pollard pleaded guilty this week to espionage charges, but the case is far from closed. He sold U.S. secrets to a group of Israelis. That is raising questions about U.S. relations with a close ally, while on another front, intelligence officials are pondering how to prosecute the growing number of spy cases without giving too many secrets away.
Members of Congress scolded Israel for damaging relations with the U.S.
It was indeed a serious effort by the Israeli government to penetrate our intelligence community, and it was successful, and I don't like it.
Jonathan Pollard pleaded guilty this week to spying for Israel. Ronald Pelton was convicted of selling top secrets to Russia. They are just 2 of 27 individuals arrested for spying in the last 2.5 years. And high-profile court proceedings have brought intense scrutiny not just to the spies, but to the secrets they gave away.
Jonathan J. Pollard was a civilian analyst employed by the Navy's Anti-Terrorist Alert Center, which is commonly referred to as the ATAC. In July 1984, Pollard became a spy for the Israeli intelligence service. For the next 18 months, Pollard sold thousands of classified documents to the Israelis, documents which the United States had not intended for release to Israel. The public perception is that Pollard was a Navy spy. In effect, Pollard was a spy who happened to work for the Navy, but who was used by the Israelis to penetrate DIA. The point is, Pollard was specifically tasked by the Israelis to obtain DIA material, not Navy material. The Pollard case amounted to a foreign intelligence penetration of the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Good evening. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. There's another new and potentially explosive threat tonight to relations between this country and Israel. CBS News correspondent Rita Braver reports exclusively that U.S. officials are investigating the alleged Israeli smuggling of more U.S. military know-how.
Law enforcement officials tell CBS News that the Justice Department and U.S. Customs have launched a major investigation into allegations that Israel smuggled U.S. technology to build cluster bombs. Those bombs, when detonated, release hundreds of smaller explosives. The U.S. banned their sale to Israel after they were reportedly used in the invasion of Lebanon. Today, federal agents executed search warrants at 2 companies in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and another search was planned in Erie, Pennsylvania. Vector in Cedar Rapids makes equipment for compressing and coating medicine capsules, but U.S. officials say the equipment can easily be converted to military use. Officials at a dozen other U.S. companies have been subpoenaed, as well as several Israelis. The Israelis who work at their Defense Missions Purchasing Office in New York do not have diplomatic immunity. Early today, Israeli Ambassador Maya Rozan was called to the State Department and informed of the probe. The investigation comes in the wake of the Israeli spy case involving Navy employee Jonathan Pollard, detention of a former Israeli general in an alleged illegal arms deal with Iran, and a reported Israeli scheme to illegally buy nuclear weapons technology.
It will come at a very bad time where there is a lot of unsettling atmosphere over the fallout from the Pollard affair.
The Israeli embassy said it was studying the case and had no comment yet. Rita Braver, CBS News, Washington.
In February of 1987, only weeks before sentencing, the U.S. government prepared a victim impact statement. This 46-page document from Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger's office outlined the alleged damages created by Pollard's espionage. Over the years, censored versions of this classified document have been released to the American public, leading to further speculation concerning the true damages. Those intimate with the case maintain Pollard caused profound damage.
The true damage came not from the volume, it came from the quality of what he passed. And the quality has to do with identifying very precisely exactly where we were getting the intelligence information from.
These were documents which on their face contained what in the United States we call sources and methods. The people, institutions, and systems, both technical and human, which produced the intelligence that was on the face of the piece of paper. And in that sense, I think it was, as it was ultimately described, as it was one of the most egregious compromises of classified information in the history of the country.
Shortly before the sentencing, a 4-page memo from Caspar Weinberger was delivered by courier to the judge. Many charged that the language used by Weinberger was inflammatory. Pollard's acts were referred to as treason.
You know, in the Pollard stuff, really crazy, considered to be the most damaging spy in U.S. history, selling nuclear secrets of the U.S. To the state of Israel.
It has been more than 16 years since a civilian working for the Navy was charged with passing secrets to Israel. Jonathan Pollard pled guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and is serving a life sentence. At first, Israeli leaders claimed Pollard was part of a rogue operation, but later took responsibility for his work.
Years in prison, one of the most infamous spies ever caught in America has been released. Jonathan Pollard was convicted of giving suitcases full of classified U.S. material to the Israelis. And if he gets his way, as our Stephanie Gosk reports, he won't call America home for much longer.
Jonathan Pollard, convicted spy, sentenced to life in prison, is now a free man.
Mr. Pollard, will you comment at all?
No,
I'm sorry. I can't.
Released after 30 years in federal prison for handing over hundreds of thousands of sensitive documents to the Israelis in the mid-'80s. Born in Indiana, Pollard worked as an officer in the Naval Investigative Service. This video obtained by NBC News shows him at a cubicle stuffing so many documents into a suitcase, he actually struggles to close it. A mostly redacted CIA damage assessment concluded that the espionage put at risk important U.S. intelligence and foreign policy interests. We spoke to the government's chief prosecutor in the case over Skype.
He had access to the highest caliber of intelligence. He stole it. He sold it for money. He was not remorseful. I would have been happy to have seen him rot in a federal prison.
But the Justice Department did not object to his parole. Now critics worry what message his release is sending to the rest of the world.
No doubt, a lot of excitement here in Israel. Everybody are welcoming Pollard and his wife, his ill wife, Esther, coming to Israel tonight. Remember, important to mention, he was brought in a private airplane of Miriam and Sheldon Adelson, the donors, also the owners of Israel Hayom, the newspaper I'm writing in. After 30 years in jail, after, I would say, very unacceptable by most Israelis, unacceptable policy by U.S. government, because Pollard was punished in a way that no other spy like him was punished in the U.S. After all that, he is coming here, kissing the land, kissing the ground. As we could see, he's accepting, getting from Netanyahu, the prime minister, an ID, Israeli ID. Both are getting it, and they are blessing Jewish traditional blessings because of the excitement of the moment. So really, for many Israelis today, it's, as I said, unbelievable pictures coming from Ben Gurion Airport. The couple will now go to live in Jerusalem.
You know, in the Pollard stuff, really crazy, considered to be the most damaging spy in U.S. history, selling nuclear secrets of the U.S. To the state of Israel, involving the Israeli embassy, the U.S. Bird Foundation, which is supposed to be a binational foundation for joint U.S. and Israeli research set up by Congress, was used to, most likely used to funnel Pollard a lot of money. And one of the main people that facilitated his Pollard's activities was a top official at the Bird Foundation, and they go on to set up Gemini Israel Ventures, which invests, one of their first investment, the people involved in that Bird Pollard intersection. They go on to be invest almost immediately, and one of their first companies was ComTouch, later run by Isabel Maxwell. And then more recently, Samanage, this Solar Winds group, one of their main investors, also Gemini Israel Ventures, just to show how all this stuff ends up interconnecting. And of course, Isabel Maxwell was involved herself in the Promise software scandal.
A top secret government computer program comes back to haunt the U.S. Tonight, you'll see how that program is now being connected to multiple local murder cases. It's 11 o'clock, time for news.
The Promise computer program, database and pattern recognition software, was a new source of information and power in the early 1980s. It starts when the program's designers, Inslaw Corporation, accused the U.S. Justice Department of stealing the software for their own foreign policy purposes. This programmer testified he altered the program to create what's called a back door to allow government spying. This happened while working on Cabazon Indian sovereign land.
Well, the parties that were involved in the distribution of this software were involved in covert operations, and they were involved in Nicaragua and Central America, and they were involved in operations in the Middle East.
This U.S. Justice Department memo from 1985 shows the Promise software was being sold to Middle Eastern arms dealers and wanted no paperwork or customs inspections to interfere. Even Unsolved Mysteries got on the case when the last journalist to investigate this spy scandal was found dead in his hotel room. Danny Casolero's wrists were slashed in 1991. It was ruled a suicide, but his reporter notes disappeared, and the book on the conspiracy he was to title Indio was never finished. Congressional hearings were held in 1992.
It describes the committee's investigation into serious allegations that high-level Department of Justice officials were involved in a criminal conspiracy to force Inslaw, a small computer company, out of business.
And remember Judge Basin, who found in favor of Inslaw against the Justice Department. Well, a few months later, Judge Bason's reappointment to the bench, thought to be a formality, was blocked by the Justice Department. His career has been destroyed.
From an office in India to foreign capitals all over the world, several murder investigations are connected to this spy scandal.
The number of murders that have occurred to prevent leaks are incredible. There's nearly 50 murders that can be directly ascribed to this pattern of activity. You have a case of forensic artistry, shall we say, where you have professionally trained people that set up a crime scene, and they make it phenomenally difficult for investigators to backtrack, make a murder look like a suicide.
Bad things seem to happen to people who make waves in the Inslaw affair. Earlier this year, Michael Riconosciuto contacted Bill Hamilton and signed a sworn affidavit for Hamilton's lawsuit against the Justice Department. Almost immediately, Riconosciuto was contacted by a Justice Department official and given a very clear message.
Back off or else.
Less than 2 weeks after that threat, Michael Riconosciuto was arrested on drug charges.
My main concern right now is staying alive and protecting my family.
I think it's about time to get the whole story out.
His name is Ari Ben-Menashe. He's a former Israeli intelligence agent.
Once it's out, there's no reason to hurt me physically anymore.
And today, he is hiding in Australia, in fear, he says, of his life.
So many people in the last 10 years who were working for the various governments on these issues, due to cover-ups, died mysteriously.
Just recently, Gordon, I interviewed Mr. William Hamilton, the president of Inslaw, and we talked to him about how the Israeli Mossad stole his Promise software.
That's right.
And you brought that out first in your book, Seeds of Fire. Now, what I didn't know until I read this new book, Robert Maxwell, Israel Super Spy, was that Robert Maxwell basically was the salesman for Promise. He's the one who took it and marketed it around the world. Well, let's back up and talk about first how Israel got their hands on the Inslaw Promise software.
Well, it was the most brilliant coup pulled off by that most brilliant spy master of all, Rafi Eitan of Mossad. He, at the time, was in his late middle years, but extraordinary man. You have to think of Rafi like a small tank is the best way to describe him. He is physically so powerful. He has also got this amazing ability to change his appearance with just a minimum of disguise. And he said, you know, all this stuff about beards and all this stuff you could disguise is all nonsense, he said. All you need to do, he said, is put cotton wadding in your cheeks or up your nose. You need to wear a pair of glasses. If you don't smoke, smoke. If you take a pipe, it's perfect. If you don't, use one. And that's it. And you may adopt a limp, he said. Now, the point is, he took on the guise, when he went to see Bill Hamilton at Inslaw, he took on the guise of a public prosecutor from Israel. What he'd done, he had got hold of this real public prosecutor's passport and just simply had his forgers slip Rafi's photograph into the passport. And he came, though he was wanted by U.S. Customs for questioning over other matters to do with intelligence operations against America, Rafi just bowled on through Kennedy Airport. Nobody spotted him. Nobody says, that looks like Rafi Atan, because he had just nicely disguised himself. And he turned up at Inslaw, and he went in, and he asked to see how this might work, because at the time Inslaw was selling it, of course, as a piece of software to use by public prosecutors to track down criminals. And Rafi said there are plenty of these criminals, as you know, in Israel, unfortunately, laughing. He has this funny little laugh, which is not really a laugh. It's like a chilling breeze that goes past you as it comes out of his mouth. And Bill Hamilton and Nancy Burke Hamilton and his small staff were totally taken in by Rafi. And he sat down, he had his tea with them and all that stuff. And only when he left, as Bill told me, did he realize something strange about this guy, but he didn't know what. Well, Rafi went back, and with a brilliant ploy, he went back to see his contact at the Justice Department, because he had facilitated justice to get him into America by simply saying he was coming from the public prosecutor's office in Israel and would like to see the software he'd heard about. So he goes back, and he goes into the office of a man called Brewster, who is in charge of liaison with Inslaw, which is Hamilton's company. And Rafi says, so Bruce said, how did it go? And Rafi says, wonderful, very interesting. He said, oh my God, he said, I forgot something. And Bruce said politely, what did you forget? He said, I forgot to ask Mr. Hamilton for a copy of his software. Now, Rafi knew instinctively if he'd asked Bill for that copy, he would never have got it, of course, because Bill wasn't going to part with that priceless software of his. Brewster said, no problem, Mr. The name he'd given as a public prosecutor, no problem. And he gave him a copy, and Rafi said to me, sometimes you don't have to work very hard to pull something off. And that's how he got it. And he goes back to Israel. Now,
a Justice Department official just literally handed to one of the top Mossad agents, handed the promised software.
Absolutely. And this, of course, has become a matter of huge grief for Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton and Inslaw, and as you know, they are still battling through the courts to get justice for themselves without any success so far.
We were dumbfounded, couldn't conceive of it.
Hamilton's contract with the US Department of Justice to supply the promised software was cancelled in 1982 without any real explanation. Only some time later did Hamilton hear that his software was turning up all over the world.
Rafi goes back to Israel, and he recognizes, well, I just can't lift this as it is. I need to do something more than that. And he sits down with that other rogue of the story, who is Ari Ben-Menashe, who'd worked for him. And Ari Ben-Menashe had been a very senior intelligence officer. They sat down, and Rafi sat there and said, what do we need, what do we need? He said, I know what we need. We'll deconstruct this, take it apart, rebuild it, but nobody can ever accuse us of stealing it because it'll look different. So his people took time to do that. They did it, but they then said, we need something else, Rafi said. We need to know what people are doing with this. And he said, I know what we need, a trapdoor.
Modifications that enabled it to key in a special access code and gain entry to all the information on the computer.
The Israelis said, we can do it, but we shouldn't build a trapdoor here because it may be traced by the CIA, who are good at this, or the British intelligence, who are equally good, traced back to us, and then we have a problem. We need to be absolutely undetectable. So Ari Ben-Menashe said, I know a place. And he came to California, and he talked to this guy he'd known some years ago who ran a little company in California, and he persuaded him to build the trapdoor. He gave him $5,000 in cash for it. And the guy said, I know it's no question time, but is this for Mossad? And Ari said to him, as he told me, you're right, it's no question time, and laughed and walked away.
I spent several thousand man-hours of programming time with a programming team, developing that subset.
This unlikely-looking character is a computer genius. His name is Michael Riconosciuto, and he says he was in charge of modifying the PROMIS program so that it could be accessed by intelligence. So whoever was holding that master key could do what?
Basically break into it and spy. I basically had to change the communications protocol, which is how that software package interacts with other software packages already resident in the computer system.
Now, they installed the trapdoor, then they had to test it. And so they went to another element in this story, a man called Earl Bryan, who's now doing time in a penitentiary for mass fraud and what have you.
The man alleged to have helped organize this deal is a Reagan political crony called Earl Bryan, and his payoff 3 years later on the PROMIS software. About an hour and a half outside Washington, D.C., you'll find this place, Earl Bryan's multi-million-dollar country estate. If you believe Michael Riconosciuto, it's the house PROMIS bought. Now, we'd like to bring you Earl Bryan personally denying that claim, but he's not being interviewed by anybody. All we got was this letter from his lawyers threatening action if we so much as associate Earl Bryan's name with this story.
And Earl Bryan had been very close to President Reagan and had, in fact, worked for him.
He had the contacts to help make sure that certain elements in Iran would not make a deal with President Carter in 1980 so that President Carter could not recover in the polls and that Reagan would win the election.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear that
Just 5 minutes after Ronald Reagan took the oath of office, Iran announced that the hostages would be released.
some 30 minutes ago, the planes bearing our prisoners left Iranian airspace and are now free of Iran.
Well, now what happened? At the time, he had a company called Hadron. And this company was a specialist company, so Rafi used this company to test out if the trapdoor would work. And they ran the test against their neighbor, Jordanian intelligence, and it did work.
Ari Ben-Menashe confirms that PROMIS was sold to Israel, but claims the Israelis, unlike the Australians, were in on the secret.
The whole idea was that we would study it, then would sell it to our neighbors, and then we could, by using telephone lines, get into their our neighbors' computers.
Both Ari Ben-Menashe and Rafi Eitan came to the same conclusion very quickly. Earl Bryan, for all his brilliance and willingness and all this stuff, did not have the resources that they wanted. And they said one word. Robert said, Ben-Menashe, and Rafi completed, yep, Maxwell. He's the man. So Maxwell was hauled in, and he immediately saw for himself this was a wonderful chance to make money. And he didn't understand software at that stage, but my goodness me, he was on a fast learning curve. And he set off to sell PROMIS, which was the name of the software. And the ironic thing is, and the cheeky thing is, that Rafi Eitan decided, and this is what really, really does tick off poor old Bill Hamilton, is this. Rafi Eitan decided, Oh, I'll keep that name, Promise. It's such a good name for selling. And so he stole it. Not he stole the name as well.
And he actually sold it as Promise.
Oh, yeah, it's still sold as Promise. Now, he went off around the world. Maxwell then became not just super spy, but ultra super salesman. He went off round the world, and he pulled it off brilliantly.
They sold it to their allies as well, including Australia.
The list of countries which allegedly bought the Promise software reads like a who's who of America's friends, as well as its most bitter enemies.
Gordon, briefly explain to our listeners why Mossad wanted Maxwell to sell this Promise software to other government agencies around the world. He sold it, I guess, to Canada and European nations. What was Mossad's hidden motive in getting this Promise software into the government computers of other nations?
Well, very simply, it gave Mossad an inside track view of what was happening when everybody was using Promise. Sitting in Tel Aviv, Rafi Atan and his technicians would know exactly what was going on in those departments, in those people using it. For instance, with a single piece of paper, you can pretty well track anybody, that person's life, where he's done, his phone calls and so on. It's like a never-widening ripple that goes on, and the information is just priceless when it comes back, because it's all sorted and coded for you and decoded and so on. Well, what he was able to do, for instance, he would go to the Russians and say, you need this to keep track of what your little friends in the Soviet satellites are doing, and Croesus said, you're absolutely right. And Maxwell would demonstrate it, and the Russians, KGB, would have it. But what they didn't realize, sitting in Tel Aviv, there were people listening to what the KGB were doing. It became extraordinary because Maxwell enabled the Israelis. They were able to listen into the Syrians. Maxwell sold it at cut-price lots to the Egyptians. He sold it everywhere.
Gordon, was the CIA aware of the trapdoor? Or
not initially, because they were building their own version of Promise, which they'd also got from Justice.
So this went for years with only the Israeli Mossad knowing about the trapdoor.
Yeah.
Robert Maxwell intimately involved with that. His twin daughters, Christine and Isabel, were intimately involved in the affairs of the front company. He used to sell that bug software to U.S. national laboratories, including Sandia National Laboratory, and so that Israel could continue spying on nuclear secrets. A lot of this, goes back to the same Israeli spy master, Rafi Eitan, who was running the now defunct Israeli intelligence agency, Lakim, that was focused on scientific espionage. And it was largely focused on U.S. nukes to a huge degree.
One of the things that's in this book that just really opened my eyes, stunned me, was Gordon's revelation of the relationship between Robert Maxwell and former Texas U.S. Senator John Tower, who was at one time probably the most powerful member of the U.S. Senate. Gordon, but let's talk about John Tower's involvement. How did Tower get involved with Robert Maxwell, and what did Maxwell use Tower to do?
Well, originally, Israel arranged for Henry Kissinger to facilitate the introduction to Tower. Maxwell wanted Tower for Israel to be his door opener into the Reagan administration, and more important of all, to be his door opener into the nuclear arsenal of America, which was Los Alamos. Tower at the time, as you know, had just retired from his post as chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Committee. He knew everybody in the intelligence forces everywhere. And so Maxwell struck a deal with Tower. He would pay him $200,000 a year, plus wonderful bonuses in any currency he wanted, at any bank he wanted in the world, because Maxwell had banks everywhere. And in fact, Tower became his door opener. So Israel had a door opener in Maxwell. Maxwell had a door opener in Tower. Tower became the man who would usher in Robert Maxwell in to see Reagan, Attorney General Meese, anybody he wanted. And it was Tower who finally and speedily arranged for Robert Maxwell to sell a doctored version of Promise with the trapdoor to the Sandia laboratories in Los Alamos.
Tower. Wait a minute. John Tower, former senator of Texas, helped Robert Maxwell to sell the promised software with the Israeli Mossad trapdoor to our nuclear laboratory at Los Alamos, which gave the Israelis a window into Los Alamos.
Correct, and we substantiate every word of that by the FBI documents we have obtained with the help of Bill Hamilton, and we've obtained elsewhere, which show exactly how the FBI had tried to track this, and we detail how the then director of the FBI found his moves blocked, almost certainly from the White House, almost certainly with people at the level of Bill Casey of the CIA, Weinberger, and people like that. A lot of people suddenly decided it was not a good idea to have this investigation into how Maxwell had got into Los Alamos. And that's very frightening because, in fact, it was Tower, his influence, his power still, that blocked off the investigation.
Gordon, at that time, was it William Webster who was FBI?
William Webster was the head of the FBI.
And so Webster was onto this scandal, and he was trying to investigate the Israeli Mossad penetration of Los Alamos, but high-level Reagan White House operatives blocked the FBI investigation.
That's right, and it's to this day it's blocked, and it's amazing because to this day you will never get to the bottom of that. I mean, there's been many attempts, and we've come as close as anybody, I think, in what we've detailed. But, you know, it was extraordinary because we have actually his pitch speech, Maxwell's pitch speech to Sandia, which is marvelous. It's a wonderful piece of theater he puts himself through. And the result is he sells the document, he sells it, and it's in there. Now, what happened was that when the FBI became suspicious, having been alerted by their field stations, they're blocked off, and they can't do anything. And Maxwell got away with that with the help of Tower. Tower was so extraordinary because Tower gave additional respectability to Maxwell's kind of cover.
Was John Tower aware of the hidden motive of Robert Maxwell?
Oh, yeah, there's no question about it. John Tower knew, and John Tower took the Maxwell dollar, if you like, or the Maxwell shilling.
So you're saying John Tower, I mean, he was a traitor to the United States of America.
You could say that in the simplest way. He was a traitor in that sense.
But this guy was a right-wing Republican U.S. senator from the state of Texas, and he sold us down the river.
Yep, and you know, the point is, he did it because he was greedy
and a drunk. And he had a reputation for hard living and drinking. That was one reason I think his nomination was turned down as Secretary of Defense. Right. They tried to get him into the Defense Department.
Yes. He became, next to Maxwell, a priceless asset for Mossad because he would tell Maxwell everything. Maxwell would feed straight back to Tel Aviv. Maxwell took him to Bulgaria. He took him to Central Europe. He took him everywhere. And so Tower all the time was talking because he did have a serious problem with young girls and heavy booze. And Maxwell used all this. And Tower is, to me, as much a traitor as anybody else I've come across in a long time in the history of America. They won't like this, Republicans. But the fact is he was, and he was very dangerous. And what he's done, we'll never know how much Mossad owe to Tower.
But, we didn't do anything about it. Then in the early 90s, of course, you have the Jeffrey Epstein sexual blackmail scandal being set up, which involved a sitting president, basically committing acts of pedophilia at Epstein residences while he's president in the mid-90s.
There was an ever-revolving door of girls.
Who else was underage?
All of them. And those girls brought other girls, too.
They've been involved in our stealing our technology for many, many years. But another way that Israel has affected U.S. foreign policy is through blackmail operations. And I would point to Jeffrey Epstein, who was allowed for 30 years to recruit young girls in America from vulnerable, broken homes, as young as 13 years old. And Mr. Epstein, who I believe was a fake billionaire, I do not believe he was a billionaire. I believe he was an actor, an imposter on behalf of the Israeli Mossad. Mr. Epstein then lured powerful, influential American men into his various mansions so that they could rape the girls. The sexual acts were videotaped, and the videos were sent to Israel for blackmail operations against Americans.
If it were proven, what would the U.S. establishment do?
Nothing. Nothing. Too many American leaders have been videotaped by Jeffrey Epstein. There's not going to be any action from the American political establishment. The American ruling class is corrupt, and the American people must clean house. Both parties, both political parties in America are controlled by Zionists.
I would ask Mr. Dershowitz to also address the topic of Zev Shalev at Narrative, the Israeli-born former CBS News executive producer, and Whitney Webb, who have reported that Jeffrey Epstein was being run by Israeli military intelligence, as disclosed by Ari Ben-Menashe, and the allegations in the book Robert Maxwell, Israel Super Spy, that Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, was a KGB and Israeli intelligence agent who worked with the Red Mafia and Mogilevich to set up money laundering instruments around the world. So, Mr. Dershowitz, your background in defending Pollard and then Epstein suggests that you might be an agent of a Russian-Israeli axis. So I'd ask you to address that from a Jewish American patriot of conscience perspective. That's me.
Okay. Epstein working for the Mossad. What intelligence agency would trust Jeffrey Epstein?
Yes, I used to be the national security advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel.
Former Israeli spy Ari Ben-Menashe, who worked for Robert Maxwell, the late disgraced British tabloid Daily Mirror owner, joins me now via Skype from Montreal in Canada. Ari, thanks for coming on. You maintain that it was your employer, Robert Maxwell, owner of the Daily Mirror. You say that he was an Israeli agent, and as was his daughter.
He was not my employer. I would like to correct that.
Okay.
We worked together with him.
And you say that his daughter Ghislaine also, though, worked for Israel, and it was Robert Maxwell who introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell way before the 1990s, as mainstream media is reporting.
Correct.
And you say that his daughter Ghislaine also, though, worked for Israel, and it was Robert Maxwell who introduced Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell way before the 1990s, as mainstream media is reporting.
Correct.
I suppose what the most alarming allegations that you've been making are that the entire Epstein operation was a honey trap operation to entrap politicians, policymakers, celebrities, people in the media eye, basically to become Israel's assets.
Correct. That it became basically an intelligence operation to entrap different politicians around the world.
These guys were seen as agents. And so they found a niche for themselves, blackmailing American and other political figures.
For the Israelis? So it's hard for people to understand why Israel would want to get blackmail on an American. I'm asking a question that I can answer it quite probably, but for most people, it's hard for them to think about Israel as being blackmailing their leaders in the United States. It's a very...
It was quite their MO.
And then Israel taps Bill Clinton's phone lines at the White House, gets access to the first Monica Lewinsky tapes.
So they set up an operation outside Monica's apartment, and they bugged it. And they picked up some 30 hours of phone sex between the president and Mr. Lewinsky.
30 hours?
About 30 hours, yeah. And those are all taken back to Tel Aviv.
tries to use it as leverage to release Jonathan Pollard, which Clinton tries to do. Then CIA Director George Tenet says he'll resign and make a big stink, so they don't.
I tried very hard to get him a parole, a commutation from several presidents, most particularly President Clinton, who came close to doing it. But then George Tenet, the head of the CIA, stepped in and said that he would resign and protest if it happened.
And then he ends up pardoning Mark Rich, another Mossad operative, instead.
So on his final day in office, in a very controversial move, Bill Clinton, over Justice Department objections, pardoned Mark Rich, which is very unusual because usually a presidential pardon goes to someone who's paid their debt to society, who's changed their lives. Mark Rich was a fugitive from justice. This had never been done before, and so it was hugely controversial at the time.
And that just takes us to the early 2000s.
Well, you mentioned in the article as well that it was the CIA, I believe, or if I believe that's what you said in the article, that still considers the Israeli government to be one, or rather the intelligence apparatus. The NSA considers them still to be the biggest threat to America, to
the third top spy threat to the U.S. Russia, China, and Israel.
Why would Israelis spy in and on the U.S.? A General Accounting Office investigation referred to Israel as Country A and said, quote, according to a U.S. intelligence agency, the government of Country A conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the U.S. of any U.S. ally. A defense intelligence report said Israel has a voracious appetite for information and, quote, the Israelis are motivated by strong survival instincts which dictate every facet of their political and economic policies. It aggressively collects military and industrial technology, and the U.S. is a high priority target. The document concludes, quote, Israel possesses the resources and technical capability to achieve its collection objectives.
And we're supposed to act like Israel would never spy on us despite this litany of cases. And I didn't even get through all of them. So like after the phone lines are tapped, you have Amdocs and Converse Infosys running this huge nationwide surveillance campaign, and also the Israeli art student scandal, which was espionage specifically on the Drug Enforcement Agency because of Israeli intelligence's huge involvement in the ecstasy trade in the U.S. at the time.
Los Angeles, 1997. A major local, state, and federal drug investigation sours. The suspects? Israeli organized crime, with operations in New York, Miami, Las Vegas, Canada, Israel, and Egypt. The allegations? Cocaine and ecstasy trafficking and sophisticated white-collar credit card and computer fraud. The problem? According to classified law enforcement documents obtained by Fox News, the bad guys had the cops' beepers, cell phones, even home phones under surveillance. Some who did get caught admitted to having hundreds of numbers and using them to avoid arrest. Quote, this compromised law enforcement communications between LAPD detectives and other assigned law enforcement officers working various aspects of the case. The organization discovered communications between Organized Crime Intelligence Division detectives, the FBI, and the Secret Service. Shock spread from the DEA to the FBI in Washington and then the CIA. An investigation of the problem, according to law enforcement documents, concluded, quote, the organization has apparent extensive access to database systems to identify pertinent personal and biographical information. When investigators tried to find out where the information might have come from, they looked at Amdocs, a publicly traded firm based in Israel. Amdocs generates billing data for virtually every call in America, and they do credit checks. The company denies any leaks, but investigators still fear that the firm's data is getting into the wrong hands. When investigators checked their own wiretapping system for leaks, they grew concerned about potential vulnerabilities in the computers that intercept, record, and store the wiretapped calls. A main contractor is Converse Infosys, which works closely with the Israeli government and under a special grant program is reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by Israel's Ministry of Industry and Trade. Government officials are worried about, however, is the possibility that Amdocs data could get into the wrong hands, particularly organized crime, and that would not be the first time that such a thing has happened. Fox News has documents of a 1997 drug trafficking case in Los Angeles in which telephone information, the types that Amdocs collects, was used to, quote, completely compromise the communications of the FBI, the Secret Service, the DEA, and the LAPD. There's a report that was circulated, it has now been disclosed by the DEA, that reported that over the course of a year and a half, numerous federal agencies had encountered individuals who refer to themselves as Israeli art students essentially visiting these facilities, military installations, FBI, DEA, INS, both the publicly listed addresses as well as some that are not made public, and those particular facilities are intended to be kept secret.
New tonight, are there spies among us?
Seems traveling door-to-door salesmen in northern Utah County are sometimes asking some strange questions. ABC4's Brent Hunsaker has been looking into this, Brent.
Yeah, these salespeople say they're Israeli students. They even produce Israeli passports. They say they're selling their own artwork to raise money to open a gallery. So, why would Israeli art students want to know about the National Security Agency? West of Redwood Road at Camp Williams, the NSA just starting on its new data center. So what will the super-secret agency stuff into a 1 million square foot building? It's a secret, and one that apparently interests art students who are selling door-to-door. The word is going out through blogs and even church bulletins. One such notice to women of the LDS Church in Highland said the students could have ties to organized crime and terror groups, and that part of their mission here is to gain information on the new NSA installation. This whole starving Israeli artist spiel is nothing new. It's been going on for years all over the country, all over the world. But in the United States, it's interesting that they seem to have a fascination with government facilities. For example, in Florida, it was DEA. Here, NSA. Officer Matt Showerhammer of the Saratoga Springs Police Department got no confession when he caught up to a group in his town.
They looked like everyday college students.
But he discovered they're no artists.
I said, if you're actually an artist, why don't you draw me something? Gave them a piece of paper, gave them my pen. They produced a picture that was about on par with what my kindergartner could have done.
And they began to ask questions and attempt to sell their art. And we reported that this was a dynamic that had been described by government documents as an intelligence gathering operation. Following that particular story, we then described the U.S. intelligence community's grave concerns that our civilian telecommunications are compromised and vulnerable to intelligence gathering, because many of the companies that provide services in our telephone calling are owned by or closely aligned with Israel, and that they have been occasionally investigated by our federal government for tapping or taking information from our telecommunications for the purposes of intelligence. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork. Documents say they, quote, targeted and penetrated military bases, the DEA, FBI, and dozens of other government facilities, and even secret offices and unlisted private homes of law enforcement and intelligence personnel. The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and/or explosive ordnance units.
I mean, you have all of this stuff going on, and that's the early 2000s. And then basically, I mean, after 9/11, it just gets really crazy. And you have Converse, Infosys.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement. Comverse insists the equipment it installs is secure. But the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Converse have, in effect, a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Converse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Converse is considered career suicide. And sources say that while various FBI inquiries into Converse have been conducted over the years, they've been halted before the actual equipment has ever been thoroughly tested for leaks. A 1999 FCC document indicates several government agencies expressed deep concerns that too many unauthorized, non-law enforcement personnel can access the wiretap system. And the FBI's own nondescript office in Chantilly, Virginia, that actually oversees the Kalia wiretapping program, is among the most agitated about the threat. But there is a bitter turf war internally at FBI. It is the FBI's office in Quantico, Virginia, that has jurisdiction over awarding contracts and buying intercept equipment. And for years, they've thrown much of the business to Comverse. A handful of former U.S. law enforcement officials involved in awarding Comverse government contracts over the years now work for the company. Numerous sources say some of those individuals were asked to leave government service under what knowledgeable sources call troublesome circumstances that remain under administrative review within the Justice Department. And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett?
Carl, is there any reason to suspect in this instance that the Israeli government is involved?
No, there's not, but there are growing instincts and an awful lot of law enforcement officials in a variety of agencies who suspect that and have begun compiling evidence and a highly classified investigation into precisely that possibility. Brett?
All right, Carl, thanks very much.
9/11 is an obvious example, in my opinion. There's no denying that Israelis, or whatever you want to call that, Corbett and plenty of others have shown to be undeniable.
Yeah,
I mean, even
Israeli
our own FBI
intelligence, Saudi intelligence, and U.S. intelligence all obviously involved in 9/11. Pakistani intelligence.
Right.
You know, it's pretty obvious.
It began when this woman was watching the Twin Towers burning from her apartment in New Jersey. She noticed 3 men on top of a van, posing for pictures with the towers burning in the background.
And I could see that they were like happy. You know, they didn't look shocked to me. You know, they didn't look shocked. I thought it was very strange.
The witness called police, who stopped the van hours later and arrested 5 men. All 5, it turns out, were Israeli. They were turned over to the FBI. Sources tell ABC News during a check of national security databases, some of the men were listed as having had connections with Israeli intelligence. At the FBI, that set off alarm bells.
A major terrorist manhunt began, and just 6 hours after the attack, the van was stopped at a roadblock by patrolman Scott DiCarlo.
We were asked to detain the van and the passengers. They were just removed from the vehicle, patted down for safety precaution, and detained.
911 call at 410 Park.
I think once the FBI arrived, one of them stated that they were on our side. There's something to that effect.
5 Israelis were arrested for filming and celebrating as the first tower was hit. As they were being arrested, one of them told Officer DiCarlo, "We are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem. Please search the vehicle, and explosive residue was found." The 5 Israelis arrested, Sivan Kurtzberg, Paul Kurtzberg, Yaron Shmuel, Oded Elner, and Omar Mamari were part of a Mossad front company called Urban Moving Systems.
Yuval Aviv is a counterterrorism advisor to the U.S. Congress, but was once a spy for Israel's secret service Mossad. He says Urban Moving was a front company for Israeli intelligence, and that some of its workers were spying illegally in the U.S.
Israel has engaged in intelligence gathering in friendly countries. Some of it is done with permission, and some of it probably has been done without permission in areas that is vital to Israeli interest.
The FBI wasn't satisfied. Channel 4 has learnt from intelligence sources that some of the men's names were already known to American counterintelligence. Paul Kurtzberg admitted serving in an Israeli army anti-terrorist unit. He refused to take a lie detector test for 10 weeks.
I was serving in a special unit in the army, and it's not a big secret or something like that. But there are things that I have to keep to myself as loyal to my country.
Some of the Israelis were discovered to be Mossad agents after their names were run through the database. This was confirmed by Vince Canistaro, former chief of operations for counterterrorism, CIA.
The FBI needed the answers to 3 important questions. Who were these men? What brought them to that parking lot on the morning of September 11th? And did they have any advance knowledge of what was going to happen that day?
And at that point, we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is, we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event. Our purpose was to document the event.
They went on an Israeli talk show to explain their actions. Their excuse was that they were coming from a country which experiences terrorism daily, so their purpose was to document the event. How did they know there was going to be a terrorist event?
He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping.
We know that explosive residue was found in the van of the dancing Israelis. Well, another urban moving systems van got caught, but this one was full of explosives. They also tried to blow up the George Washington Bridge.
There was a bolo, which is be on the lookout for a particular van with, there's supposed to be a few occupants in there. And the bolo basically stated that this van may be on its way to destroy the George Washington Bridge or something like that, if I remember correctly, and blow up the bridge.
The FBI has now put out a nationwide APB all points bulletin for a white Chevy van with New Jersey registration. Written on the back is Urban Moving Systems.
2 or 3 men arrested on the New Jersey Parkway. Deborah, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. That is the information that I'm getting from 2 sources, that there was a van either on the New Jersey Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway, and that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van.
But some very intelligent and aggressive cops also stopped another terrorist attack from happening on the George Washington Bridge. CBS 2 has learned exclusively that 2 men are in custody tonight after being arrested at the George Washington Bridge with an entire truckload of explosives. Now I'm told that those explosives could have been enough to blow up the entire span and all the cars and the people that were on it. And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives had anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge.
I was watching the towers, and though I wasn't the closest, I saw them crumble to the earth like they were full of explosives. And they thought nobody noticed the news report that they did about the bombs planted on the George Washington Bridge. 4 non-Arabs arrested during the emergency, and then it disappeared from the news permanently. They dubbed the tape of Osama, and they said it was proof. Jealous of our freedom, I can't believe you bought that excuse.
We reported on the approximately 60 Israelis who had been detained in connection with the September 11th terrorism investigation.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States. Investigators suspect that the Israelis may have gathered intelligence about the attacks in advance and not shared it. A highly placed investigator said there are, quote, tie-ins, but when asked for details, he flatly refused to describe them, saying, quote, evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information. Asked this week about another sprawling investigation and the detention of 60 Israelis since September 11th, the Bush administration treated the questions like hot potatoes.
I would just refer you to the Department of Justice with it. I'm not familiar with the report.
I'm aware that some Israeli citizens have been detained. With respect to why they are being detained and the other aspects of your question, whether it's because they are in intelligence services or what they were doing, I will defer to the Department of Justice and the FBI to answer that.
Beyond the 60 apprehended or detained and many deported since September 11th, another group of 140 Israeli individuals have been arrested and detained in this year in what government documents describe as, quote, an organized intelligence gathering operation designed to, quote, penetrate government facilities. Most of those individuals said they had served in the Israeli military, which is compulsory there, but they also had, most of them, intelligence expertise and either worked for Amdocs or other companies in Israel that specialize in wiretapping. Earlier this week, The Israeli embassy here in Washington denied any spying against or in the United States.
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected, none of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote, Brett.
The world will not be the same from today on. I don't know who is responsible. I believe we will know in 12 hours. Bin Laden sits in Afghanistan. There is a source of terror.
Who else do you identify, though? Because we're not saying he's responsible for this necessarily.
No, we don't say that he's responsible. Every simple step, crossing borders or going on a plane or on a ship, will become more complicated. It's a time to launch a operational, concrete war against terror, even if it takes certain pains from the routine activities of our normal society. This is the time to deploy a globally concerted effort led by the United States, the UK, Europe, and Russia against all sources of terror consistently along 6 or 10 years. Iran, Iraq, Libya, North Korea. This is the only way. Without this clarity of purpose, there will be no world order, no world.
Given that the ultimate consequence of 9/11 was the beginning of a now 15-year-long struggle to transform the Middle East, a struggle that the neocons that went on to populate the Bush administration had been openly advocating since the clean break policy paper in the mid-1990s,
so I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islamists bringing down the World Trade Center.
It isn't hard to see how the September 11th attacks were indeed a boon for Israel. But information linking Israeli spies to advanced knowledge of 9/11 remains classified information.
The Israeli newspaper Ma'ariv has reported Israel's former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly said the September 11th attacks have been good for Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "We're benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq."
Nations, democracies don't go to war easily, and they usually debate and argue before they do. Sometimes they have to be bombed into going to war. In fact, that's what happened in World War II. All of Europe had been conquered. You had to, America was actually bombed in Pearl Harbor, and that was a pivotal event that opened the eyes of Americans. And once their eyes were opened, they gathered the power that is available in this great free nation, and the result was preordained. I think in a similar way, the bombing of September 11th opened the eyes of Americans to see the great conflict and the great danger that faces us. And once opened, then the overpowering will of the majority of the people of the United States, so the steamroller is inexorably moving to decide this battle.
As Netanyahu told Congress in 2002, sometimes they have to be bombed into going to war.
Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall we had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded. And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? we can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure. I'm not advocating that, but I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition of, it's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get nastier at that.
Israel bombed the United States on 9/11 to manipulate you into fighting their wars.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know."
While American audiences may laugh at the seeming folly of how decisions to go to war are made, the end result has been incalculable suffering and death for millions upon millions in the decimation of Iraq. I wonder how much laughing there will be when the American people fully comprehend that the invasion and occupation of Iraq was from beginning to end an unlawful war of aggression based on fraud for the expansionist agenda of the Greater Israel Project. In other words, Americans have been used as cannon fodder by a treasonous, bought and paid for U.S. Congress and White House. Even worse, this story of sacrificing American sons and daughters on the altar of worship of the Jewish state of Israel marches on.
As a Marine, Kenneth O'Keefe fought against Iraq. It shattered his view of the world. Ever since, he has been fighting a war against war, facing American bombs as a human shield or running the Gaza blockade. He is never afraid to speak truth to power.
Well, I think if you really want to know the truth about the invasion of Iraq, there's clearly some incentives for the invasion. Oil, securing oil was one of them. Establishing permanent military bases in the region was another one. But a far less talked about reality is Israeli plans which made clear that the balkanization of surrounding countries, in particular Iraq, if we go to Oded Yanan's plan for Israel in the 1980s, it lays out very clearly a strategy of destabilizing all of the surrounding areas of Israel. This includes Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and even Egypt and Saudi Arabia. And this long-term goal is part of the Greater Israel Project. So in terms of the sectarian divide you see happening in Iraq today, it's actually all part of a very well-designed plan to try and secure the goal, this fantasy goal of the Greater Israel Project.
While first considering Argentina and Uganda as a homeland, the Zionist movement claimed rights to what it called Greater Israel, which includes all of Palestine and part of today's Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt.
We will rebuild the third temple. We will do animal sacrifices again, and God will give us the whole of Israel, all the way up to the Euphrates River and down to the Nile River. We'll have the Greater Israel that we've always dreamed of, and we won't have to believe in Jesus to get it. That's what you guys are. Maybe you'll be alive. Hopefully you'll be alive to see it. But that's the truth.
הארץ ישראל מניל לפורט.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it. And we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. Starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Well, from that shopping list, from that prognosis, 5 of those countries have already been done. So we can see that this is pretty clearly what the agenda was. And what agenda is being carried out here is something called the Yinon Plan. Oded Yinon was a Likud Israeli military strategist who wrote this paper about how Israel's master plan would be constructed to dominate the Middle East. It was printed in a journal called Kivunim, a journal for Judaism and Zionism, in February 1982. And thanks to an Israeli scholar named Israel Shahak at Hebrew University, he translated this document into English for our benefit so we would understand what was the Israeli plan. And what the Israeli plan called for was basically something called Balkanization, breaking up the big Arab states into ethnic statelets, which is exactly what was done to Yugoslavia in the 1990s, if you recall. Yugoslavia was broken up into 6 or 7 mini-statelets based on ethnicity. And that's what's being done in Iraq. You see there, that Iraq is now basically fragmented into 3. Syria is in the process of being broken up. Libya is now broken up. Sudan has been de facto or de jure broken up. So this is the name of the policy, the Yinon Plan. And as I said, it was articulated first in public in 1982. And the plan is basically, as I said, to break the states up along their ethnic confessional lines. So in the case of Iraq, you have the Shiites in the south, the Sunnis in the west, and the Kurds in the north. In this area in the north, Kurdistan, that's where the American military is now stationed with about 10,000 troops. That's also, by the way, the place where the Rothschild family owns the oil company. So what's going on here? This is the end game, or the recent game of an Israeli policy, of a Zionist policy, which the American Joint Chiefs of Staff were fully aware of back in 1948 when before Israel was even a state. This quote is from one of the papers that they wrote, 13 papers on Zionism and what it would mean to the United States in 1948. This one's dated March 31st. And the Joint Chiefs of Staff, these are the highest brass in the U.S. military. They said Zionist strategy will seek to involve the United States in a continuously widening and deepening series of operations intended to secure maximum Jewish objectives. Well, what were those Jewish objectives? Besides settling Palestine and taking the land of Palestine, they included the expansion of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, into Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. And 2, the establishment of Jewish military and economic hegemony over the entire Middle East. Well, I think the Joint Chiefs of Staff were pretty correct about this, because now, as we see now, since 9/11, the United States has been involved with NATO in Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and left those countries fragmented, destroyed, and seriously reduced in the quality of life. And now the country that's being targeted, obviously, is Syria. This plan is being done in order to help the state of Israel. As Hillary Clinton said, she wrote this email back in 2012 when she was Secretary of State. And she wrote that the best way to help Israel is to use force, American force, in Syria to overthrow the government. So this email from 2012 reveals that the United States has been seeking to oust the Syrian government because it is in Israel's interest, not ours. There is no American interest whatsoever in Syria. I've been there several times. The United States and Syria have never had anything to do with each other. There's nothing there for us. Nothing there for, So it's being done to fragment and destroy that country.
But why would Israel benefit from an unstable Middle East, an unstable Arab nations? Because what we see that this instability actually is followed by fundamental Islam. And people who are overthrown are either replaced by fundamentalist powers, or there's just more sectarian violence that grows.
Yes, and it would seem on the surface from a sane point of view that everything is going wrong. But in fact, when you fracture a country along sectarian divide, ultimately you weaken the country. What the last thing that Israel or the United States wants is a strong Nasser-type leader, an Arab nationalist who will seriously ensure that the resources of that country are taken and protected and used for the benefit of the people. That's the last thing that the empire wants and that Israel wants. So while you have these religious fundamentalist nutcases who are running around bombing and doing all sorts of stuff like that, you have a weakened, fractured country in Iraq, and that is the prerequisite for ultimately expanding Israel into the fantasy of the Greater Israel Project. It doesn't seem sane, and it's not sane, because those who are trying to carry out these agendas are pure and simple psychopaths.
Good morning for Michael Schroyer.
Good morning.
I, for one, am sick and tired of all these Jews coming on C-SPAN and other stations and pushing us to go to war against our Muslim friends. They're willing to spend the last drop of American blood and treasure to get their way in the world. They have way too much power in this country. People like Wolfowitz and Fife and the other neocons that Jewed us into Iraq, and now we're going to spend the next 60 years rehabilitating our soldiers. I'm sick and tired of it.
John in Franklin, New York. Any comments?
Yeah, I think that, of course, American foreign policy is eventually up to the American people. One of the big things that we've not been able to discuss in this country for the last 30 years is our policy toward the Israelis. Whether we want to be involved in fighting Israel's wars in the future is something that Americans should be able to talk about. They may vote yes. They may want to see their kids killed in Iraq or Yemen or somewhere else to protect Israel. But the question is, we need to talk about it. Ultimately, Israel as a country is of no particular worth to the United States. It doesn't.
You mean strategically?
We have they have no resources we need. Their manpower is minimal. Their association with us is a negative for the United States. Now that's a fact. What you want to do about that fact is entirely different. But for anyone to stand up in the United States and say that our support for Israel doesn't hurt us in the Muslim world, or our support for Hosni Mubarak's dictatorship doesn't hurt us, is to just defy reality.
We have to be honest about this event that has led to so much. And it's worth pointing out that after 9/11, Converse Infosys, which is now known as Variant, is hired by the NSA to make all of the backdoors for the NSA into the entire U.S. telecom grid, into Facebook, Microsoft, and Google and Apple products. So to think that Variant, which spied on the U.S. previously, founded by former Unit 8200 guys, and their former head, Kobe Alexander, wanted on tons of charges, including fraud and like all of this money laundering by the U.S. government.
Jacob Kobe Alexander helped invent voicemail. His company, Converse Technology, became a high flyer. But the feds say he masterminded a 15-year scheme to manipulate the value of Converse options, cheating shareholders out of millions. With a grand jury indictment looming in 2006, he moved to Namibia, which had no extradition treaty with the U.S. Previously charged with 35 felony counts, Alexander, who's now 64, will plead guilty to a single count of securities fraud this week.
You know, that's the company they choose to make the backdoors and think they're not going to keep that for themselves and use it as blackmail when they've just been blackmailing the whole time. So to think that, you know, having all this Unit 8200 front companies around critical U.S. systems is a good idea is nuts.
In 1999, the super-secret National Security Agency, headquartered in northern Maryland, issued what's called a top-secret, sensitive, compartmentalized information report, TSSCI, warning that records of calls in the United States were getting into foreign hands, in Israel in particular. An internal Amdocs memo to senior company executives suggests just how Amdocs generated call records could be used, quote, widespread data mining techniques and algorithms, combining both the properties of the customer, like credit rating, and properties of the specific behavior such as whom the customers are calling. The Amdocs memo says the system should be used to prevent phone fraud, but U.S. counterintelligence analysts say it could also be used to spy through the phone system. Fox News has learned that the NSA has held numerous classified conferences to warn the FBI and CIA how Amdocs records could be used. At one NSA briefing, a diagram by the Argonne National Lab was used to show that if the phone records are not secure, major security breaches are possible. Another briefing document said, quote, it has become increasingly apparent that systems and networks are vulnerable. Such crimes always involve unauthorized persons or persons who exceed their authorization, acting on exploitable vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities are growing because, according to another briefing, the U.S. relies too much on foreign companies like Amdocs for high-tech equipment and software. Quote, many factors have led to increased dependence on code developed overseas. We buy rather than train or develop solutions.
After all, our NSA, which is called Unit 8200, it's pretty big, How big do you think it is? Well, I'll give you a hint, okay? America, the United States, is about 42 times the size of Israel in terms of population. So how much bigger do you think the American NSA is relative to the Israeli NSA? No brave people among you? 42 times? 40 times? Nah, come on. It's not 5 times, but it's not 10 times bigger. It's not even 10 times bigger. You know the Five Eyes?
The Five Eyes Alliance was created in the aftermath of World War II to monitor enemy communications and share intelligence between its founding nations. It is now recognized as the largest spying network in history. As a result of changes since September 11, 2001, the Five Eyes Alliance is now capable of capturing virtually every phone conversation, email, internet search, or social media entry in the world.
Israel is the sixth eye? No, Israel is the second eye. So we have a tremendous sunk investment, whether we like it or not. To survive, you know, Israel's not that big a country, but it has to have a very big defense capability.
And it's no coincidence that after Epstein got caught, he and Ghislaine Maxwell were all about courting and funding Silicon Valley.
I'm the founder of an internet project called the Terramar Project. It's an ocean-based digital platform.
And she founded the Terramar Project, an NGO that purported to work like a social media network for the ocean.
A British businesswoman is hoping to change the status quo by turning the oceans into an online country.
Given its maritime mission, it's perhaps understandable that Terramar's founder didn't face scrutiny from CNN or even the United Nations.
Terramar Project, she controls the oceans around the world. If you were to look at the website, you have the opportunity to buy up parts of the ocean through her.
Exactly. It was all about that. And at the same time, you have Ghislaine's sister, Isabel, who comes up in my article with Samanaj several times, was also intimately involved with that and running Israel Venture Network.
There's been a considerable number more than I thought would attend, and they've come from New York, from Israel, from Silicon Valley, from all around LA. And they're also the kind of people that have been there. There are investors, there are entrepreneurs, there are service providers, there are people from the Federation who, it's a good thing, it's a very good mix that's come here, I think, out of interest and out of desire to do business and to look and see what is available. Sharon Justman from Step Strategy had been in the last few years. Every year she created an Israeli forum for doing business between Israel-facing companies, and she'd been talking to Yossi Vardi and others, and it seemed that it was ripe to expand it into, in fact, a one-day conference. And so she came to me, or she found me through Glenn Yago, the Milken Institute, and asked if I would help seed this company and bring panelists and speakers and sponsors to help create what this has become.
And the Perez Center for Peace and Innovation, that's all about it's sort of like Startup Nation Central that I've written about before, getting all these Unit 8200 companies seeded or acquired by or partnering with major U.S. tech companies as a way to sort of ensure Israel's cyber influence, which of course is Netanyahu's favorite thing to talk about, how he's made Israel the global cyber power.
Is a shift from the old world to the new world. Here's the old world, okay? That's the old world. That's all of 10 years ago, okay? Here are the 10 leading companies in the world. They include 5 energy companies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 IT company. Now shift forward 10 years, which is nothing, it's a blink of an eye, and you see this most amazing change. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 IT information-based companies, no energy left. All of these new companies, all of them, top 10 companies, have major research centers in Israel. Not research centers, major research centers in Israel. These are some of the 300 that do. And in for some of them, these research centers are the most advanced that they have outside their home country. With the click of a button, you can bring down nations to their knees very rapidly, if you so desire, and if you're willing to take the risks, because every system can be hacked. Our airplanes, our hospitals, our cars, our banks, our data banks, they can be hacked. And the possibilities of sabotage and worse are all there.
And what will happen to politics in your country when somebody knows the entire medical and personal history of every politician, every judge, and every journalist in your country, including all their sexual escapades, all their mental weaknesses, and all their corrupt dealings? Will it still be an independent country, or will it become a data colony? When you have enough data, you don't need to send soldiers in order to control a country.
New tonight, are there spies among us?
Seems traveling door-to-door salesmen in northern Utah County are sometimes asking some strange questions.
Yeah, these salespeople say they're Israeli students. They even produce Israeli passports. They say they're selling their own artwork to raise money to open a gallery. Why would Israeli art students want to know about the National Security Agency?
Gail Black of Eagle Mountain bought this painting from one of those Israeli students.
And then afterwards I thought, oh, what did I do?
It's been going on for years all over the country, all over the world. But in the United States, it's interesting that they seem to have a fascination with government facilities. For example, in Florida, it was DEA.
Could you go back? You mentioned students selling art. What was the connection again to the...
Officer Matt Showerhammer of the Saratoga Springs Police Department got no confession when he caught up to a group in his town.
They looked like everyday college students.
But he discovered they're no artists.
I said, if you're actually an artist, why don't you draw me something? Gave them a piece of paper, gave them my pen. They produced a picture that was about on par with what my kindergartner could have done.
There's a report that was circulated, it has now been disclosed by the DEA, that reported that over the course of a year and a half, numerous federal agencies had encountered individuals who refer to themselves as Israeli art students. And they began to ask questions and attempt to sell their art. And we reported that this was a dynamic that had been described by government documents as an intelligence gathering operation. The first part of the investigation focuses on Israelis who say they are art students from the University of Jerusalem and Bezalel Academy. Essentially visiting these facilities, military installations, FBI, DEA, INS, both the publicly listed addresses as well as some that are not made public, and those particular facilities are intended to be kept secret. They repeatedly made contact with U.S. government personnel, the report says, by saying they wanted to sell cheap art or handiwork.
Are you familiar with this issue?
There were a bunch of Israeli art students involved in espionage and may have been following al-Qaeda.
Deportation of Israeli art students spying in the U.S., and should this worry us?
There have been a number of Israelis, and I've actually seen some people come to my house in Maryland who are selling art, and they identify themselves as students, and there's something unusual about it.
The majority of those questioned, quote, stated they served in military intelligence, electronic surveillance intercept, and/or explosive ordnance units.
Well, that somehow these Israeli art students have been spotted around a number of places, including some federal buildings, and that has raised some counterintelligence concerns within the U.S. government. that perhaps the Israelis have been conducting some type of intelligence collection activities.